Hello everybody, and welcome back to Convert a Warm, Cheerful Web Design to HTML and CSS. So, we're doing really well. We've done a lot of work. We've done pretty much the whole basis for the entire site. At this point, we just need to do cleanup. So that means we need to style all of our form elements and the buttons and things like that. And then we need to go back and just tweak things. Like if you see around here, that needs some work. We need to add our typography, make that look a little bit better. Just make sure everything lines up a little bit more than you can see right here. Okay, so going back to our project, and what we need to work on in this lesson is going to be the forms. So we'll place that at the very bottom, and we can do it right here. So if we need to, we can go and grab another heading. Like so, I'll just copy and paste that, and now I'll say form elements. Now we're actually going to be working within Firefox again because it's a better medium for going over this kind of stuff. So we'll focus down here for the time being. So style, and we'll just grab that, come to the bottom, paste it in. And now, remember how in the previous lesson I noted that if you want to use this tool, you need to make sure that you update your image paths. Otherwise, it's not going to be relative to the correct directory. So you can do that again, and we'll say img and replace that just with img like so, and that should take care of it. So refresh the page again, and now we're all set to go. I'll zoom out a few clicks, and let's get into it and work on these form elements. So the very bottom, the first step is style the buttons and all inputs and text areas. Now what I want here is to apply a border radius all around of 5 pixels. But this is a CSS3 property and value, and it's not fully implemented across all the browsers. So many browsers add support for vendor prefixes. So for example, we can do Mozilla and WebKit, and you do that by prefixing Moz for Firefox and then WebKit for Chrome and Safari. Now the new Chrome and the new Safari as well as IE9 will support this officially. So what about old versions of Internet Explorer? They're not going to get rounded corners, but no big deal. This is just the border radius. Okay, so the next step is let's align all the text to the left and make sure that no matter what, the text is placed to the left just in case you override it somewhere else. And then finally, when we hover over this, these are inputs. We should use the cursor pointer to give somebody some feedback that they can be clicked on. So if I change that, and now I come over and hover, you'll see that we've changed those. Okay, so the next step is to style these buttons that you see right here. So we'll do that right now, and we'll say button, and then also anchor tags that receive a class of button. We're going to style those identically. That way you have the option. And we'll first begin by saying border of none. So if I'm going to zoom in here and note this button right here. So the border, by default, all browsers will apply a border. It's going to look a little bit different from Safari to Firefox to Internet Explorer. So I'll add the border, and next we're going to set a color of white and the font weight to bold. And I'm also going to set a font size to these and maybe 16 pixels. We want it to be rather large. And now we need to set a background. Now, if you'll remember, if we come back into our project, we do have a background saved called button BG. It looks like we have 2 of them. So that one is simply just a texture. So why don't we play around with that one for now? And that's buttonbg.png. URL buttonbg.png. And I'll set that to repeat. So notice that that texture is being applied. But what's nice about that is when you set a color, you get the background color, but you also get the texture behind it, as you can see right there. So now all we have to do is go back into our project and figure out what color specifically we need to grab. So we'll grab that, say something like that, copy and paste it, and bring it into our project. Like so. And that'll be fine. We'll tweak that a little bit more in the future. But for now, that should be okay. And if you want, you could even set an opacity, or you could go back and lessen the intensity of that. Or if you want, you can try out the JPG version, as you can see right there, and that one's going to be a little bit different as well. So let's stick with this one for now. The next step is let's apply some text shadow to the text. That way it looks a little more inset. So text shadow, again, a new CSS3 property. However, we can rely on it quite a bit. You don't have to worry about any vendor prefixes. So I'm going to push it up 1 pixel, and it's going to be D09944, which is essentially just a very dark black. It's actually a very dark yellow. And can you see that texture right there? Or that shadow right there? That makes it look a little bit better. However, it's still too close to the edge, so let's provide some padding all around. And we'll do 10 pixels on the top and bottom and 20 pixels on the left and right. This is shorthand, so it would be the same as doing this. Okay, top, right, bottom, left. Just think of the way a clock goes. 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock. But if you omit these, this is 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock, this is 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock, or top, bottom, left, right. Okay, but now you can see there's the problem with our original slice of the background image. So you could say repeat, maybe X. We could do that and then try to set the background color to the very bottom. Why don't we try that? So let's go back and grab one of these colors at the very bottom. And sometimes you need to play around with these things for a little while. Yeah, that's still not quite right. So what we'll do here is we'll take repeat back on, and at least for the time being, we'll stick with just a texture background, and then we can go back and fix that a little bit later. And probably what we do is we'd add a bit of a mask to that background and lessen the texture because it's really intense. But if I zoom out, that looks fine. So now if we scroll to the top, you can see that it looks good. Those buttons are just like what we see. If I come out and I zoom out just a bit, just like what you see right there. Pretty cool, right? All right, so the next step is let's do some more work with the inputs and the text areas themselves, which will be down here. So we'll say input text area. And we'll begin by providing a background color, and that's going to be F8EEDF. Now what that's doing is it's applying the background color that we can grab. There we go. It's grabbing the background color right here. Okay, and again, just simply grab it, grab that color, and paste it into your document. All right, so the next step is to provide a border. So let's go in, take a look, and can you see that a border has been applied to each of these elements? So copy that, come back, border 1 pixel solid, and paste that in. Let's zoom back in here. There you go. Okay, but now we need some padding. So we'll apply, 10 pixels if we measure it from the PSD, and that'll apply 10 pixels worth of padding all around. Now we need to set a specific color as well, and that's going to be 247184, and that's going to be that green, or not green, but more of a bluish color. If I zoom out, it should show up. There you go. That color right there. Now the final step is the inputs need some margin on the bottom. So we'll say margin bottom of 15 pixels. That way they each have a good bit of breathing room. Okay, but now there's a couple of things here. Notice how project details and timescale, those have a higher width. So if I want to measure that, you can see that it's roughly around 270 pixels, right? All right, well, let's specify that then. And to do it, well, we can override text area. And I can say width is 270 pixels. All right, and that's going to push that one out. But we also need a way to target time scale. So let's go back into index.html, and let's go to the bottom. Input ID is time scale. We've already applied one. We could also have given it a class if we needed to, but in this case, it's fine. We'll just target directly with an ID, since it's kind of a unique situation. And now both of those have a specified width. So the final step is to the text area. We need to override that and give it a height here, and this is somewhat of an arbitrary height. You can measure it in the PSD, but you could give it a height of around 130 pixels, and that should be enough for this free rate quote. Now, notice how when I hover over these buttons or I click on them, nothing really changes. It's very difficult to note that anything's actually happening other than the cursor. So let's provide a little more feedback, and we'll provide hover effects. So we'll say when you hover over an input, and we also need to say when you hover over a text area, and also when you hover over a button. Each of those are unique elements. And then we also need to say, what about when you focus? And focus is when you click on something. So when you focus on an input is when you click on it, it's now going to receive the styling from the focus pseudo class. So we'll do the same thing, text area, focus, button, focus. And here we'll say a background, or I'm sorry, a WebKit box shadow. And we're going to give it 2 pixels worth of blur and a color of 061B20. So now watch, we are in Firefox. So let's duplicate this and take care of the Mozilla form. So let's try it out. Hover over it. So I'm thinking on this resolution you may not be able to see it. If I hover over this, it's applying a little bit of effect. Why don't we try something like 5 pixels instead? Hover over it, and now can you see it? You don't want it to be too extreme, but you just want there to be some feedback. So hopefully you can see that, just a little bit of an effect. And notice when I click on it, even when I go away, that effect is still being applied because at that point you're focusing on the input and it still receives that styling. So the next step is, let's lastly do the official form of box shadow. And now, what about when you hover over one of these buttons? If we go to the top, right now nothing's happening, and that's not good either. So why don't we apply that right here? And we'll say button, hover, as well as the class of button, hover. And here, let's keep it simple and give it a background color of D89, D42. And what that is, it's just a darker shade of yellow. Okay. Now, if you want, what you could do is grab that texture background as well, and paste that in, and now, when I hover over it, it's just going to be a little bit different. So let's zoom all the way out. Now when I hover over it, can you see that difference? It's receiving that little shadow behind it, and the colors changed just a little bit. Okay, now go back to the bottom. That's being applied. Now let's go back to Photoshop and take a look. So everything looks good here. The only other thing I note is a couple things. One, their buttons are different. They have some typography that we'll add in a later lesson, but also the text is capital, and in this case it's not. So let's make sure we add that in. So we'll place it right here. We'll say text transform uppercase. Okay, that looks a little bit better. And then also, he's not using rounded corners as we are here. So if you want, you could override that, or you could get rid of these. Okay, and you could keep it like that. It's just up to you. Now, if we go back to the top of our project, here he is using rounded corners, and here he's not. So if you want, you could override this below. So let's copy that, take it out, and then we'll say, but when you're within a header, in that case, apply it. So let's go back, and these are anchor tags, are they not? Let's check this out. Going to the top. Okay, they are button elements, but they are not within the header, are they? So they're within banner wrap. All right, let's just go and fix that. Banner wrap, and do that again. Okay, so now at this point, those receive the rounded corners, but if we go to the bottom, those do not. Now, a couple things here. While we're at it, notice how the footer section is so close to the main area. That's not really convenient, is it? So let's search for main. And why don't we, at the very bottom, apply margin bottom of around 50 pixels. And that just gives it a little more space. Let's zoom out just a little bit. Yeah, and that just gives it a little more breathing room at the top. But now can you see that this cuts off because we're using margins? So what if we did padding bottom? Now we can apply padding, but we don't cut anything off because we're not using margins. Okay, that looks better. And we should probably do the exact same thing to the footer. So if we go down to the footer section right here, and we'll say footer, let's say background of red. Sometimes it helps to give it a background just to see what you're dealing with. Overflow hidden. Yeah, so we need to apply overflow hidden right there because all of these 3 columns are floated, and we've learned that when you do float the elements, you take them out of the, not totally out of the flow because they do affect inline elements, but as far as block level elements, it does take them out of the flow. So let's make sure we apply overflow hidden and clean that up. Okay, and that also fixes our spacing issue at the very bottom. Okay, so we still need to do a little more work here. Like in the PSD, can you see that these are left and right? But in ours, they're not. So let's try this out. What if we set, let's play around a little bit with 100 pixels. Yeah, so that's the issue here, is that the default width of these inputs is too much. So sometimes you can just play around with it and see how much you can get with that width. Or you can, grab the calculator and figure it out specifically. But sometimes it's a little bit easier is just do it by eye. A lot of people do. Okay, so it comes out to 122 pixels, and we didn't have to use our calculator. But we also have a no spacing at all. So if we set margin right 10 pixels, or not exactly, because we could grab this email input directly and remove its margin right, but otherwise we'll just, once again, just kind of do it the lazy way and figure it out. Now, this is going to affect all inputs. So if you want to say type equals text. Now we're saying this is only going to target the inputs that are actual text inputs, as you can see right there. Now another thing here is the buttons aren't lining up properly. So why don't we try this? We'll say right here, grab the button and we'll say margin right of 20 pixels. We can play around with it a little bit. Yeah, and that's going to make that line up better. So let's grab that, remove it, and try placing it here. And you want to make sure there's no spacing issues with it. Okay, so you may need to be a bit more specific. All right, so I'll zoom out again, and let's take another look at how everything's looking here. Now I'm thinking that we probably need to apply a background color when you hover and focus over these inputs as well. So why don't we do it right here, and we'll say input type equals text hover, and input type equals text focus. Let's try that one out, and we'll give it a background color of something slightly darker, and we'll try out EDDBC0. And now when I hover over these, can you see that we get a different background color? But again, that's only being applied to the text inputs themselves. If you want to do the text area, we could try maybe placing it within here. Let's try that. Okay, that works, but the only thing is now the button is being overridden because there's more specificity here. So to combat that, we can apply more specificity to the buttons. Yeah, and in this case, it's really not a specificity issue as much as it is a cascading issue. Because this shows up lower in the style sheet, it's going to take precedence, assuming specificity is the same, it's going to take precedence. So we can just grab that and move it down below if we need to. And now that's being applied, while these still receive that different background color. Okay, good. So I'll zoom out a few clicks, and let's do a couple tidy up things while we're here. So we'll copy this and come back into Espresso and paste it in so we don't lose anything that we've done here. And now let's come in and notice here in the sidebar that the text, that needs some spacing from the image. So you can see, if I zoom this out, we have our image. So section P needs to have some spacing on top. And we could say a margin top of 10 pixels. We'd have to measure. So we could go into Photoshop, come on over, measure, and how much spacing does he give? Roughly about 20 pixels worth. So why don't we, for the time being, try it out. Section P, margin top of 20 pixels. Now that doesn't seem to be taking effect, so let's try something else. Let's try section, background of red. Okay, so that is being contained. We could also try, why don't we instead try applying margin bottom to the image, because that's really what needs the spacing. Yeah, and that's going to look better, so let's get rid of that. Yeah, and that just gives some more breathing room. Okay, so now we need to find the proper place for this. So we could say section, okay, sidebar, section, and secondary section, IMG. That's a good spot for it. And now we can add it in right there. Okay, so let's close that out, copy this, and bring it back into Espresso. We need to fix our image path, so we'll do that right now. Replace all, and it looks like we have this one quick issue, so we can fix that easily just by doing a search and replace on all. All right, let's come back into Firefox. Refresh the page, that lines up. Let's go into Safari, or I'm sorry, let's go into Chrome, and let's take a look at things, make sure everything lines up correctly. We have our spacing, we have our images, we got the hover effects, the focusing. Yeah, we're getting there. All right, so that's going to do it for the form lesson. In the next lesson, we are going to do our final bit of cleanup. we're going to compensate for IE. And then in the following lesson, we're going to do our last bit, which is doing the typography, doing the cleanup, doing the validation to make sure we haven't made any mistakes, which I guarantee we have. And then we'll also clean up any textures or anything that doesn't line up. Like, for example, if you look in the header right here, I can really tell that that background is repeating. So we'll reslice the background image to make that less apparent. So stay tuned. I'll see you later.